Today at the National Press Club, the Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police, Reece Kershaw, and ASIO Director General, Mike Burgess. Their agencies are responsible for law enforcement and intelligence gathering across the country. Reece Kershaw and Mike Burgess with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. My name is Tom Connell. I'm a politics anchor at Sky News and also treasurer here at the Press Club. Today we have the privilege of hearing from Reece Kershaw, the Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police, and Mike Burgess, ASIO Director General, those that, well, we in the fourth state say operate in the shadows and behind the scenes. So today we'll hear all of their secrets, I'm sure. Australia's security environment has evolved rapidly this century. The fear of large-scale terror attacks changed to the difficulty of trying to monitor the prospect of so-called lone wolf attacks. In recent years as well, it's increasingly an online threat that goes beyond terror. Could be people radicalised online, your bank account targeted, perhaps your data being leaked as well. And in the past few months, of course, the war in Gaza has resulted in religious and ethnic tension played out at times on our streets. There was the stabbing of a bishop last week in Sydney that has been deemed a terror attack. And while the stabbing spree in Bondi that left 6 people dead was not deemed a terror attack, it has the country on edge and questioning if enough is being done to prevent violence against women. Then there's the role of social media, those social media companies in all of this as well. In short, there's a lot to cover, so I'll let the experts take over. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on Twitter, where our handle is PressClubAust. You can also use the hashtag NPC. Please welcome Director General Mike Burgess and Commissioner Reece Kershaw to the podium.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to the Press Club for hosting us today. It's great to be here. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet here, the Ngunnawal Ngambri people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge the Attorney-General, the Honourable Mark Dreyfus QC, Andrew Sierra, the Director-General of National Intelligence, Heather Cook, the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, Catherine Jones, the Secretary of the Attorney-General's Department, and also I've spied the Minister for Police and Emergency Services, Mick Gentleman from the ACT. Welcome. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'd also like to take this opportunity just to quickly acknowledge the men and women of the Australian Federal Police and my organisation, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, for the tireless hard work they do to protect all of us. So thank you, team, you're doing a great job. The internet is a transformative information source and the world's most potent incubator of extremism. The smartphone is a brilliant communication tool and an all-in-one surveillance device that's listening when you're not on the phone, tracking your movements and recording your browsing. Social media is a convenient way to connect with family, friends in the world, and a convenient way for scammers, criminals and spies to connect with you. Encryption protects our privacy and enables our economy, and creates safe spaces for violent extremists to operate, network and recruit. Depending on who you speak to, at one extreme, artificial intelligence will save humanity. At the other extreme, it will destroy it. ASIO has been protecting Australia and Australians for 75 years. Over that time, we've constantly sought to understand the upsides of new technologies and the potential downsides. Terrorists and spies don't do BAU. They are early adopters and adapters of technology, always looking for ways to exploit vulnerabilities, and we need to stay ahead of them. Today, Reece and I will tease out some of the dynamic tensions between security and technology. We want to ensure individuals and industries are more resistant and resilient targets, and we'll ask the tech companies to assist us with our vital missions. Perhaps the best place to start is the tech du jour, artificial intelligence. The way I see it, AI is hot, equal parts hype, opportunity and threat. Hype because there's a yawning chasm between current reality and what's being claimed by tech evangelists and marketing gurus. A lot of what they call AI isn't. Opportunity because stripping away the hype, it is likely AI will deliver dividends to every part of the society, from the economy to healthcare. and threat because the productivity benefits of AI also extend to those who could use it to threaten Australia's security. ASIO assesses that artificial intelligence will allow a step change in adversary capability. We're aware of an offshore extremist already asking a commercially available AI program for advice on building weapons and attack planning. And when the program refuses to provide the requested information, the extremist will try and has tried to bypass ethical handbrakes. As I mentioned at the outset, the internet is the most potent incubator of extremism. AI is likely to make radicalisation easier and faster. We also anticipate artificial intelligence will increase the volume of espionage. Not only will AI improve espionage capabilities, nation-states will be more motivated to harvest personal data to assist their own programming, and more motivated to steal information about rival AI technologies. In this year's annual threat assessment, I talked about a foreign intelligence service grooming Australians on a professional networking platform. The team used a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all pitch in its online approaches. Artificial intelligence will likely empower more bespoke, personalised social engineering. Adversaries will have a powerful tool to exploit big data sets, enhancing their ability to target vulnerabilities in people, vulnerabilities in software, and vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. AI will facilitate foreign interference by allowing foreign intelligence services to conduct more prolific, more credible, and more effective disinformation campaigns. ASIO is tracking and monitoring all of these likelihoods and their implications for Australia's security. Of course, the most obvious and possible best defence against adversary use of AI is AI itself. I can confirm that ASIO has been using artificial intelligence for many years now. It's not replacing our people, it's augmenting and assisting them. As one example, the vast amounts of data being produced every day means that finding a critical piece of intelligence is less like finding a needle in a haystack than looking for a needle in a field of haystacks. AI makes that process easier and faster. It can identify worrying patterns and relationships in minutes and hours rather than weeks and months. Unlike our adversaries, ASIO's use of artificial intelligence is strictly controlled and governed by ethical controls. We put humans at the centre of our decision-making. While a process might be data-driven and technology-enabled, it will always be human-led. AI is a case study in inherent tensions between technology and security. While new technologies can deliver rich evidence, they can also be exploited. As I said earlier, terrorists and spies are early adopters. We see the same thing with end-to-end encryption. In recent years, tech companies have significantly expanded and extended their use of encryption. And from what the industry is saying, they plan to expand its use even further. Encryption is clearly a good thing, a positive for our democracy and our economy. It protects privacy, it enables communications and transactions. But at the same time, it also protects terrorists and spies, saboteurs and the abhorrent criminals Reece will talk about. Even ASIO's most unsophisticated targets routinely use secure messaging apps and virtual private networks to avoid detection and hide their activities. In 2021, I revealed that encryption damages coverage in nearly 97% of our counter-terrorism cases. That impact is now worse. It's virtually 100% in both our priority counter-terrorism and counter-espionage cases. There is a very clear and well-established legal framework that allows ASIO to seek warrants to access communications. This process is subject to strict safeguards and is overseen for legality and propriety by the Inspector General of Intelligence Security, who has powers to a Royal Commission. If the Attorney General is satisfied that a matter meets a specific security threshold and our proposed access is sufficiently targeted and proportionate, they can grant a warrant that allows us to access and intercept a letter from a suspected terrorist or spy, or lawfully intercept a phone call, or lawfully intercept an email. But even when that warrant allows us to lawfully intercept an encrypted communication, we cannot actually read it without the assistance of the company that owns and operates that app. The company has to be willing and able to give effect to our warrant. Today, I'm urging the tech companies to work with us to resolve this challenge. Let me be absolutely clear. I'm not calling for an end to end-to-end encryption. I'm not asking for new laws. I'm not asking for new powers. I'm not asking for more resources. I'm not asking the government to do anything. I'm asking for the tech companies to do more. I'm asking them to give effect to the existing powers and uphold existing laws. Without their help, in very limited and strictly controlled circumstances, encryption is unaccountable. In effect, unaccountable encryption is like building a safe room for terrorists and spies, a secure place where they can plot and plan. Imagine if there was a section of a city where violent extremists could gather with privacy and impunity. Imagine if they used this safe space to discuss terrorism and sabotage and vilify Muslims, Jews, people of colour and the LGBTQIA+ community. And imagine if the security service and the police were stopped from entering that part of town to investigate and respond. This is not hypothetical. ASIO is investigating a number of Australians who belong to a nationalist and racist extremist network. They use an encrypted chat platform to communicate with offshore extremists, sharing vile propaganda, posting tips about homemade weapons and discussing how to provoke a race war. The chat room is encrypted, so ASIO's ability to investigate is seriously compromised. Obviously, we and our police partners will do everything we can to prevent terrorism or sabotage, so we're expending significant resources to monitor all the Australians involved. Having lawfully targeted access to extremist communications would be more effective and efficient. It would give us a real-time view, real-time visibility of their activities. I believe technology should not be above the rule of law. Encryption, the companies implementing it and the individuals using it should be responsible and accountable. Under law, all of us have a right to do many things, up to a point. Privacy is important, but not absolute. You lose that privilege if you engage in criminal conduct or threats to our security. In the case of the neo-Nazi chat room, should a nationalist and racist violent extremist's right to privacy outweigh the community's right to safety? In situations where we cannot access the communications to resolve security concerns, we must turn to other technical and human capabilities. Some of them capabilities involve physical risk, while others are highly resource intensive, which means we're constrained in the number of threats we can investigate at any one time. Using more overt capabilities forces us to declare our hand earlier than we'd like, tipping off the target and potentially compromising our investigation. And perversely, sometimes unaccountable encryption forces us to use even more invasive powers to investigate a security concern, conducting a physical search of a premise, for example. Worse still, we may be faced with having the knowledge of a likely threat, but having no practical way of understanding the extent of the concern. We recently investigated an Australian sharing extremist material online. We suspected he was communicating with overseas ISIL supporters, and we feared they were encouraging him to conduct a terrorist attack. But we did not know for sure because he was using encrypted communications. We used surveillance, human intelligence and other capabilities to determine if the Australian possessed the intent and capability to conduct an attack. This investigation was difficult, dangerous, time-consuming and resource-intensive. And yes, we eventually learned multiple offshore extremists had encouraged the individual to conduct an act of terrorism. Now, you might think this case demonstrates we don't need accountable encryption to be resolved to resolve our security concerns, but I believe it proves the opposite. If this individual was planning a terrorist attack, a quick and targeted access to communications could have been the difference between life and death. This is why the gap in ASIO's ability to lawfully intercept the use of encrypted communications by terrorists and spies is such a concern, particularly in the current security environment. This is why I'm asking the private sector to step up. I'm calling on big tech to establish lawful access solutions that can be applied in very tightly controlled and targeted situations. not to create backdoors or systemic weaknesses that break the internet. If the threat, evidence, safeguards and oversight are strong enough for us to obtain a warrant, they should be strong enough for the companies to help us give effect to that warrant, to make encryption accountable. And making encryption accountable will be a natural extension of the role that industry plays in helping government respond to many other risks on a national level. Industry partnerships are vital in protecting critical infrastructure, and industry is stepping up to help better protect the personal data they hold from being compromised by cyber criminals and nation states. We need them to step up again and help us protect Australia and Australians from threats to security. That requires making sure they can offer encryption to their users while providing effective and accountable law enforcement access capabilities. I started this address by referencing ASIO's 75th anniversary. The first and second Hope Royal Commissions were key milestones in that history. Justice Hope concluded that it is proper role of a security service to deal with special kinds of threats, recognising this requires the security service to exercise investigative methods that may intrude into the private lives when justified by the threat. He did not believe that protecting citizen security is inconsistent with protecting citizens' rights, including the right to privacy. To the contrary, he suggested they are complementary by stating, and I quote, "Public safety and individual liberty sustain each other." Justice Hope was ahead of his time. ASIO is committed to safeguarding the security of Australians and safeguarding the liberties, protecting from wrongs while securing their rights. Our lawful access capabilities help us defend democracy and safeguard sovereignty. They help us detect and defeat threats to life and threats to our way of life. And they help us do what we were founded to do. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions after Reece has given his remarks.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to the National Press Club for hosting us here today. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd like to acknowledge the Honourable Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus, KC, Secretary of the Attorney-General's Department, Catherine Jones, the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission CEO, Heather Cook, Cyber Security Cooperative Research Centre, Rachel Falk, and also to the CEO of the Police Federation of Australia, Scott Webber, the Director-General of ONI, Andrew Shearer, and of course Mick Gentleman, the ACT Government Police Minister. Many of us grew up at a time when our parents knew we were safe if the front door was locked. But now, because of technology, a locked front door is no longer a barrier for criminals. Virtual hands can reach through almost any device, and the consequences of those actions can be as damaging as if they happened in the real world. Technology has changed the way we police. Federal crime is increasing, and that is because criminals are always quick to adopt technology. The majority of federal crime is tech-enabled, such as online child exploitation, cybercrime, fraud, illicit drug trafficking, terrorism and foreign interference. And I want to be clear about why I'm here today. I want to inform the public on how they can keep safe online. I want to warn criminals that despite tech advancements, we can still identify them and bring them to justice. And finally, I want to encourage tech companies to continue working with law enforcement and other partners to ensure privacy and protection can coexist. Freedom of speech does not extend to sharing online material of children being sexually abused, nor does it have anything to do with the sharing a video of someone being attacked in a church. We used to plan the future of policing through the lens of the years to come. But now, because of constant advances in technology, the years to come are almost every 24 hours. Partly, this is because of the fourth industrial revolution. Think connectivity, automation, machine learning and artificial intelligence. An Australian-New Zealand Policing Advisory Agency research paper states that by 2030, almost everyone on the planet will have access to the internet. It is projected there will be 3.5 billion new internet users between 2020 and 2030. This brings benefits, but also serious challenges, including more perpetrators and more victims. I want to particularly thank Australian governments for providing the AFP with the legislation, tools and support needed to help keep Australians safe. But we cannot do this by ourselves or without ourselves. If it used to take a village to raise a child, constant advances in technology now means it takes a country, global law enforcement and the private sector to help keep them safe. Some of our children and other vulnerable people are being bewitched online by a cauldron of extremist poison on the open and dark web. And that's one serious problem. The other is that the very nature of social media allows that extremist poison to spray across the globe almost instantaneously. We can look at it another way. Social media companies are refusing to snuff out the social combustion on their platforms. Instead of putting out the embers that start on their platforms, their indifference and defiance is pouring accelerant on the flames. And if we consider the disinformation and misinformation from two shocking incidents in Sydney this month and how that social combustion was propagated throughout the world, we see the consequences of that indifference and defiance. Our respected leaders of faith tell us how the interpretation of religion is being purposely distorted on social media. Because of this, their communities and religious beliefs are tarnished and blamed for violent acts carried out by those who've been radicalised. We used to warn our children about stranger danger, but now we need to teach our kids about the digital world deceivers. We need to constantly reinforce that people are not always who they claim to be online. And that also applies to images and information. Another example is how criminals, pretending to be someone else, use social media to trick youth into sending intimate images of themselves and then blackmail them for money. Fearing their images will be sent to loved ones, young people have taken their lives. Imagine the anxiety these victims are feeling. Right now, I know there are silent victims feeling like their world is closing in. And please, if this is your situation, do not be embarrassed. Tell your parents, someone you trust, and law enforcement. We will protect you and make it stop. We work regularly with overseas partners to take action against sextortion gangs. To do this effectively, evidence such as screen grabs of text, demands, profile names, URLs and accounts are required. We also encourage reporting to the AFP-led ACE, which stands for the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation. This can be done at www.accce.gov.au/report. Can I now please ask you to look at the images on your tables? There are 4 images of children. They look like the photographs in our family albums or stored in our phones. Now I want you to pick the image generated by artificial intelligence. The answer is they have all been generated by AI. Now, I want you to think about a diabolical scenario facing law enforcement. The AFP identifies online child sexual abuse and we immediately triage to determine if this is a new victim, if we believe they are in Australia and if their life is at risk. It is determined this is a priority case, but after weeks, months or maybe years, investigators determine there is no child to save because the perpetrator used AI to create an image to create the sexual abuse. It is an offence to create, possess or share this material, and it is a serious crime, But the reality for investigators is they could have been using capability, resources and time to find real victims. Please reflect on that. In my experience, offenders who seek out and view child sexual abuse material can transition to contact offending. No one should ever have to see what our members see. And it's a damning indictment on humanity that we need so many investigators to combat this crime. Last year, the Internet Watch Foundation released a report titled How AI is Being Used to Create Child Sex Abuse Imagery. It stated, and I quote, "When our analysts saw the first renderings of AI-generated child sexual abuse material in the spring of 2023, there were clear tells that this material was artificially generated. Half a year on, we're now in a position where the imagery is so lifelike that it's presenting real difficulties for even our highly trained analysts to distinguish." It said, "The testimony of perpetrators themselves in dark web forums also tells you what you want to know. There's jubilation that fantasies can be made to order. All you need is the language to tell the software what you want to see. We're seeing AI child abuse material images using the faces of known real victims. We're seeing how technology is nudifying children whose clothed images have been uploaded online for perfectly legitimate reasons." End quote. Together, we must find solutions to these diabolical challenges, but we also must be proactive about our own safety. A simple measure is locking down settings on social media accounts to make it harder for others to access images and then use AI to create abuse material. Think about it like this. You probably wouldn't give a stranger a photo album of your kids. That's essentially what can happen if privacy settings are not locked down. We continue to talk to social media companies about how to help law enforcement identify a tsunami of AI-generated child abuse material we know is coming. It could include safeguards on tools that create AI-generated imagery, such as digital watermarks and prompt restrictions. While this can happen now, it is no silver bullet, and offenders are always looking at how they can beat technological countermeasures. Numerous law enforcement agencies, including the AFP, have appealed to social media companies and other electronic service providers to work with us to keep our kids safe. That includes not transitioning to end-to-end encryption until they can ensure their technology protects against online crime rather than enabling it. We recognise the role that technologies like end-to-end encryption play in protecting personal data, privacy and cybersecurity, but there is no absolute right to privacy. People have the right to privacy just like they have the right not to be harmed. People expect to have their privacy protected just like they expect police to do their job once a crime has been committed against them or a loved one. That expectation includes being able to respond and bring offenders before the justice system. In the 2018-19 financial year, the ACE received more than 14,000 reports of online child exploitation. In 2022-23, we received more than 40,000 reports. Nearing the end of this financial year, we have already exceeded the past financial year's figures. I want to thank the tech companies for the help they have provided to date. This month, the AFP assumed the chair of the Virtual Global Task Force, an international alliance of 15 law enforcement agencies working together to tackle child sexual abuse. This underscores our commitment to keep kids safe, not just in Australia, but around the world. Police commissioners around the globe stand shoulder to shoulder with us, but there is a growing sense of dissatisfaction with social media companies. On Sunday, a joint declaration was agreed to by 32 European police chiefs. It stated, two capabilities are crucial to supporting online safety. First, the ability of technology companies to provide to law enforcement investigations in response to a lawful authority with strong safeguards and oversight the data of suspected criminals on their service. This is known as lawful access. Second, the ability of technology companies proactively to identify illegal and harmful activity on their platforms. The companies currently have the ability to alert the proper authorities, with the result that many thousands of children have been safeguarded and perpetrators arrested and brought to justice. These are quite different capabilities, but together they help us save many lives and protect the vulnerable in all our countries on a daily basis from the most heinous of crimes, including but not limited to terrorism, child sexual abuse, human trafficking, drug smuggling, murder and economic crime. We are, therefore, deeply concerned that end-to-end encryption is being rolled out in a way that will undermine both of these capabilities. Companies will not be able to respond effectively to a lawful authority, nor will they be able to identify or report illegal activity on their platforms. The AFP echoes concerns raised in this declaration, but I want to forewarn criminals. We will still identify them, although we acknowledge some of our investigations may be more resource intensive. Helen Schneider is the AFP's Commander for Human Exploitation and oversees the ACE. I asked Commander Schneider about her thoughts as we deal with this wicked challenge. She said, and I quote, "Globally, law enforcement is in a technological race against online predators, and will only stay in this race by collaboratively and responsibly weaponising technology to counter this threat. The tech industry must own their role in this race. Prevention has become a non-negotiable requirement in every Australian household, and law enforcement, community and industry must be inseparable allies in the delivery of this capability." End quote. Just like the real world, we believe the same standards should apply in the online world. For example, if a judicial officer declares there is reasonable suspicion that a serious crime has been committed and is necessary for law enforcement to access information to investigate that serious crime, tech companies should respect the rule of law and the order of a court or independent judicial authority and provide that information. Because this is my concern. While end-to-end encryption provides solace for law-abiding individuals, it can also provide criminals with an instant invisibility cloak. My door is open to all relevant tech CEOs and chairmen, including Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. I know we can find common ground because, put simply, tech is supposed to make our lives easier and safer and not the opposite. It seems counterintuitive that in a world of advancements that our safety is at risk. Mike and I could not be clearer today about the challenges before us. However, regardless of how social media companies respond, our mission of protecting Australians and Australia's interests will not be diluted. As Commissioner, I'm focused on ensuring there are no criminal safe havens, and we should be able to lock criminals out of our online world just like we can lock them out in the real world while still protecting privacy and security. Finally, I know some of this content may have been distressing. If you or someone you know needs support, there are resources available on the ACE website at accce.gov.au. Thank you, and happy to take questions.
Thank you both for the address, both with an exhortation for social media companies to play ball, if you like, and tech companies on encryption. You were particularly pointed, Mike. You said you don't need new laws, you need cooperation, essentially. If you don't get cooperation, will you then need new laws?
It's a great question. I'm here today not to give the tech sector a hard time. I'm just asking for their help. I believe there is a way forward, and I think we should be talking about this. I know they can help us, and I'm hoping we can do that. If we can't, then that's a conversation I would have with government, not in this room.
Okay. Short and sharp. One question, and I'm sticking to it. Let's get round to my learned colleagues. One question each, please, and my former Sky News colleague, David Spears, would never break that rule.
Of course not. Tom, thank you. Thank you both for your address today. As Tom basically indicates, you're asking nicely for the tech companies to cooperate here. Is that the reality of all you can do? We're seeing, a fairly obvious resistance from some of the big tech companies this week when it comes to takedown orders. It sounds like the same's happening with end-to-end encryption, despite all the dangers that you've spelled out here today. So is this the reality, that we can just ask nicely, but that's about it? And what about parental responsibilities here too? What would you say to the many parents who wonder, when should my kid be on social media? What would you say, given all that you know?
Sure. I might have a go at the first part of that question, and I'll let my partner in safety and security respond. Firstly, as a matter of principle, technology is not above the rule of law. We do want help with these from these companies. It is the laws of this land. I'm not asking for new laws, not asking for new powers. We seek their assistance. That's what I'm looking for. This is our reality, but I'm looking for a sensible conversation, and I'm looking forward to having that. Of course, the reality for us is that most of our counter-terrorism and counter-espionage cases, encrypted messaging apps are being used, and that's a problem for us, and we have to expend considerably more resources to deal with these threats, which limits the number of threats we can deal with at any one time. And right now we're as busy as we've ever been in our 75 years of history. We need their help. I think it's a reasonable ask. I'm looking forward to that conversation. I recognise there'll be people who will light up and share their views on how wrong we are. Isn't that wonderful in a democracy? We can have that conversation and listen to all views as well. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and maybe the rebuffs that will follow.
I think as a parent, I can, put a couple of hats on there, but as a parent, back in the older days and still today, you go to the playground and you make sure your kids are safe. If you're going to that particular playground, you're going to watch them and make sure that they stay safe. It's not a dissimilar strategy with the internet, in the sense that you have to be connected into your child and see what they're doing on the internet, and there are things you can lock down to make sure they're not accessing the dark side of the internet. And I think there's so many tools where they're readily available, free tools as well, that parents can download and actually access that information. If they do go through the ACE, for example, that's where you can access all that information. So it is about, that prevention, education, awareness. You can't just let your child get on the internet and think that you're going to be safe, especially even in gaming platforms. That's the other space that we have to watch as well.
Just briefly, when you say tech company cooperation, Mike, are they saying no? Are they saying, server was out? What are they not doing?
Some of them are saying no. They're saying, the way we've designed this, we couldn't possibly help you. I respectfully disagree. I agree with them the way they designed it, they couldn't possibly help us, but there are ways of providing secure, lawful access. We just want that from them.
Next question from Angus Thompson from the SMH&Age.
Angus Thompson, SMH&Age, thanks very much for your speech, both of you. My question relates to a story that was in our papers today by Nick McKenzie. CCP operatives, our gang, has been designated an Australian priority organisation target by the ACI. Say, Mr Kershaw, you're chair of that organisation. Why has he been designated, and are you concerned that it points to CCP backing of organised crime in Australia?
Well, so I want to be helpful. I don't think it's appropriate that I go into the detail of that investigation and or the material that's sitting in behind that.
Could I be cheeky, ask a follow-up question for both of you, just in regards to the church stabbing video online then? What are your specific fears if that video is to remain online and continues to be dispersed?
Well, part of it is our judicial process. It's not helpful that it is out there. You want to, if it goes to a jury, for example, you want to make sure those things are not on there, but also you don't want it to add fuel to the fire in the sense of people being able to download it and be inspired by it, whether that be in Australia or anywhere else.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Sarah Ison.
Sarah Eisen from The Australian. Thank you both for your address. Just following on a question for both of you. Today, Mr Burgess, you said that ASIO had recently investigated an ISIL-related case with some international links. Last week, as my colleague was talking about, we had a terror attack at the Wakeley Church, and today there is a raid being conducted now by the New South Wales Joint Counterintelligence Terrorism Team. So I just want to ask both of you, from a policing and an intelligence point of view, if Islamic but also other religious extremism is of a growing concern at, again, that policing, counter-terrorism and intelligence view.
Sure, I might start. So terrorism threat level is possible, which means there is a 50% chance that in the next 12 months, or even right now, there's someone who's planning an act of terrorism or will conduct an act of terrorism. The most likely attack will come from an individual or a small group of individuals that go to violence with little or no warning. There is a range of ideologies, violent extremist ideologies that are drivers in the environment, religiously motivated. Sunni violent extremism is the principal in that concern, but a few years ago we had a Christian violent extremist attack in this country. And on the ideological side, the principal group is neo-Nazis, nationalist and racist violent extremists, but there are a range of individuals, including people with conspiracy theories, so it can come from a range of ideologies and it can happen quickly.
Any thoughts on counter-terrorism from a policing point of view, given the raid happening right now as well?
Yeah, well, I think in this country we have one of the best mechanisms to combat terrorism in the sense of how we're organised. It's quite unique, where we have the intelligence agencies, security intelligence agencies embedded with police and some other agencies. And we get across these matters pretty quickly, like we have right now. And there is a major operation underway in Sydney. And we do have to make, unfortunately, lawful interventions to prevent any further planning or attack on our community. So those teams have been very successful in preventing many attacks in this country, and we continue to share information and work together. And that's not just domestically, but with our international partners as well, who are often, seeing what the trends are, and if there's any further intelligence we can share about the methodology used.
And on the operation, so because there was obviously the attack and then the riots, these raids are in relation to the attack, are they?
Yes.
Any other information?
No. So,
Anthony Galloway from Capital Brief might have more luck than me.
Thank you. Anthony Galloway from Capital Brief. Both of you took over your agencies around about the same time in 2019. I was wondering if both of you can reflect on what's your biggest achievement that you can talk about publicly, or what do you feel your legacy will be that you left behind for your organisation? And I believe both of your terms are expiring this year. I was just wondering if you can confirm whether you've asked the government for an extension, both of you.
Let me start. Firstly, the next Director-General is a matter for government, so I'll make no further comment. It's an honour and privilege for me to lead the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, Australia's Security Service. It's not about my personal achievements. It's a great organisation that works hard every day to protect Australia and Australians from threat security. They were doing a great job before I got there. They're doing a great, brilliant job now. I'm proud to lead them and be part of the team. Beyond that, will be my legacy, being part of a great organisation that actually protects us all.
Yeah, similar to Mike, I'm enjoying the role still, and it is a matter for government. I think part of it is leaders want to leave the business or the police force, for example, in my example, in a better way. I think we've been able to combat many threats and new crime types. And, one of the things I'm really proud of is the innovation that exists in the AFP, and that comes from our own members. Most of our best ideas and best strategies are coming from our own people, and it's people that make the AFP, and these are committed people, whether they're working at Pine Gap to, other parts of our business in espionage and foreign interference or counter-terrorism. They're really committed to the mission. So it's pretty simple for me. You just want to leave it in a better place than when you came.
Attorney General looks quite impressed on the league table, so I think things are looking okay. Anna Henderson next.
extended job interview. Anna Henderson, SBS News. As mentioned, this counter-terrorism operation is underway. We understand it does involve minors. So my question to both of you is, how concerning do you think that is? And what you think is behind the reason that more young people are being radicalised? And maybe, if I may, just very briefly, can I confirm, Mike Burgess, whether you still sit as a permanent member of the Cabinet National Security Committee?
Well, I think there's two questions there. Which one do you want me to answer? I'm kidding. Again, that's a matter for government to talk about, so I won't talk about that. In terms of minors, we've been talking for a long time, unfortunately. There's been a growing number of minors in our counter-terrorism caseload. That did peak a couple of years ago to 50% of our priority counter-terrorism caseload. It dropped off again for a while, but it's picked up again. So they're a vulnerable cohort. Why is that? There are a number of reasons behind that. I think we're having a national debate about social media and the impact it has on society. That's one element, but it's not the only one. As Reece said in his remarks, you used to lock the front door and that would give you safety. But if your children are on their devices and you're not seeing what they're seeing, that can actually pollute and corrupt and radicalise young minds. And we see that. We see individuals, minors, who get confused by the ideology and pick multiple elements. And when ASIO and the law enforcement service are actually dealing with this problem, we're at the wrong end of that. We need society to stare into this problem earlier, understand the drivers. Much more research would be required to understand what's happening there so we can counter it and make sure these kids are on the right path. And when some of them do get caught, how we can quickly help them disengage and be de-radicalised. It's in our interest, our national interest, to help that happen.
Yeah, I think all of the above. And early intervention, you know, counter-terrorism is really hard work from a law enforcement point of view because you have to go often early. So that presents a whole range of challenges. And the teams across the country have an expertise in being able to get a feel for when they should go and you know, for example, make an arrest or disruption. It doesn't necessarily need to be an arrest. And I think with young people, what we've seen recently is, you know, they're at that age where they haven't matured their thoughts and ideas, and they're seeing this material and obviously having exposure to other people in the community. And some of the examples we've presented, you know, include being groomed from Syrian terrorists, for example, in Australia here through a gaming platform of a child who had no idea, you know, that really what they were doing was quite serious. So it is about that, you know, prevention, education, awareness, and schools play a part in this. There's a whole range of the education system and us as parents and your families to make sure you're patched in with that child. And you know, that's one of the things that we try to do with our community liaison engagement teams, is go out to our leaders, our community leaders, and talk with them about what we're seeing. And we've already done that recently again, and we have those contacts and we share that information with community leaders to say these are the signs you need to look for.
Thank you.
With an adult, is it sort of more of a focus on getting the people at a stage where charges stick, but a minor, is there more of a de-radicalisation bent? Is there a different approach as to when an interception or disruption happens?
From my point of view, definitely. Your children are different to adults. You have to treat them differently. That requires a lot of help. That's why I don't think it's too late when ASIO is involved. Of course, we do treat minors, investigate them differently as we need to. We have to consider the rights of the child in everything we do. And if we can catch them, and I've seen cases where they've been caught early, even with my people's intervention, then the police have done some great intervention. And in one case, I think there's an individual who now wants to be a police officer. You can solve it, you've just got to get to it.
Tom McElroy.
Thanks. Thank you both for taking our questions. Tom McElroy from the Financial Review. I think a lot of people observing the situation with X and Mr Musk this week are surprised to learn of the mechanism that the eSafety Commissioner can go after what is terror content online, individual URLs. Is a more holistic approach needed, something that better reflects the nature of social media, whereby there's a sort of fire hose of this content being posted and reposted and shared? Is there a better way to get it taken down and stop it reverberating?
Well, I'll quickly jump in there. I think I won't comment on the better way of doing it. I think there is an individual responsibility. If we're all contributing to the amplification and reposting, maybe we need to think about that in terms of understanding the damage and the potential problem with posting abhorrent material and reposting it and advertising it and amplifying it. So society has a response there, just like the social media companies do.
I think the boards of those companies should all be having a serious conversation about this, about the guardrails that they're going to put in to keep communities safe, not just based in the US, for example, or the UK or wherever, but across the globe. They have a corporate responsibility not to harm citizens in other countries and their own. So I think it goes back to those principles, and all we're appealing to is do the right thing. Even though sometimes it's the hardest thing, it's the right thing to do. I think a lot of them will look back in time and go, what have we done? But it'll be too late by then.
Chris Uhlmann, listed as freelance, but I believe it's Sky News and The Australian.
Thank you, Comrade Tom. Director General, you would be aware of Simeon Boykov, who goes by the name of Aussie Cossack online on his Twitter handle. He's currently holed up in the Russian consulate in Sydney, evading assault charges that have been laid against him by the New South Wales Police. On the night of the Bondi knife attack at around about 11 p.m, he posted disinformation online that named Benjamin Cohen as the person who was responsible, clearly designed at stirring up anti-Semitic hatred inside our community. Isn't that a form of information warfare, because it must at least be condoned by the Russian government if it wasn't actually directed by the Russian government? And how much of that do you see inside our borders, not just by Russia, but by other nation states?
Thanks for your question, Chris. I won't talk about the individual that you've identified there. Obviously, it's not for me to give him publicity, and as a matter of principle, we don't talk about anyone we might have a concern of, and I'm not confirming or denying in that case. But hypothetically, the example you gave, social media and the internet is a great incubator of extremism and something that can promote foreign interference, mis and disinformation. It allows it to happen at a pace and scale which is a bit different to if I just told Reece something that was wrong deliberately or just because I'm stupid. That's what the internet does. It's very powerful. That's where society has to really think and engage the critical brain. It's an example of how it could happen. Not saying that was.
Rob Scott from Network 7.
Thank you both. Rob Scott from 7 News. Your organisations have been successful in the past with thwarting terror attacks. Now you're going to these social media companies asking for help to access end-to-end encrypted messaging services. If you don't get that help, is it fair to concede that you're very likely to miss online warning signs and a terror attack could happen without you ever being aware that it was on the cards in the first place?
One of the reasons... Sorry, Reece.
There you go.
Sorry. One of the reasons I'm here is to actually ask for their help, because I don't want to be there in the future looking forward, which is our job, when a Royal Commission is saying, wouldn't it have been good if this was possible because it used to be? That would be unfortunate. So yes, it can be a matter of life and death, and that's why we're asking for this capability. Very strictly controlled and limited circumstances where I have a threshold that the Attorney General has approved. That's all I'm asking for. This is a real problem. If we can't solve this problem, as I indicated in my remarks, there are ways around it, therefore far more resource intensive and potentially dangerous. We'll press in on all forms of our capability with our partners to actually identify and stop these problems where we can. But of course, we're not all-seeing and all-knowing, and we're not asking to be all-seeing and all-knowing, so there is some risk.
Yeah, I think probably getting into a bit of detail that, you know, Meta's, I think, around about halfway through their end-to-end encryption rollout. Our fear is that they may still refer matters to us, but we won't be able to action them. We won't know who the end receiver is. And so that's going to probably cause more stress in our system of not being able to do anything with it, which I think is a disgrace.
Thank you.
So has that happened? You said they're halfway through it. Has that instance you spoke about happened so far?
Not yet.
Not yet. You said a disgrace, so that's a criticism of Meta. You feel this is deliberate and they could have designed it in a way that wouldn't be happening?
Well, they're not working with us with the problem. You've seen 32 European police chiefs say the same thing.
Next question from Claudia Vidoljak from Network 9.
Claudia Vidoljak, 9 News. Good afternoon to you both. You're both aware of the terrorist raids being carried out in Sydney today over the Wakeley church stabbing. Mr Burgess, can you explain how ASIO is assisting with this operation?
Certainly. So ASIO is a member of the Joint Counter-Terrorism Team. We have one of those in every state and territory. New South Wales Police in the case of New South Wales, Australian Federal Police and ASIO. My officers are connected and involved, embedded inside the Joint Counter-Terrorism Team. And on the back end, of course, Australia's Security Service is always doing its thing to provide security intelligence that enables the police to deal with these problems when we have immediate threats to life or anything else that's evolving.
So they're assisting in the raids being carried out today?
We are involved. It's a joint counter-terrorism team with our three agencies are represented and New South Wales Crime Commission in that state.
Paul Karp, next question.
Paul Karp from The Guardian. Thanks very much for your speeches. More than 5 years ago, Parliament passed the supposedly urgent legislation to help law enforcement agencies break encryption. I've got the latest data on how many times these new powers have been used, and you'll see that the technical assistance requests, which is the voluntary cooperation from the tech companies, reasonably well used, 66 times last financial year. The compulsory powers, technical assistance notices and technical capability notices, a big fat zero, all agencies last financial year, the year before that. So my question, please, why are you asking the tech companies for more cooperation instead of escalating and using the powers that you already have to compel it?
I think you'll see in this financial year a 100% increase on that zero. That's one thing I'll say, and it has, so, you know, I don't want to go into details of that, but, you know, it goes back to the tech companies. You know, we just want what we currently have as far as that arrangement of them being able to share material and referrals to us that we can act on. So we don't know what we'd need to request if it goes dark, if you understand what I mean.
But 100% of zero is zero. So excuse me for being obtuse. Are you actually going to issue a technical assistance or technical capability notice?
Well, what I'm saying is I'm aware that there's already been one issued recently.
There's been one of those notices issued?
Yes.
And I'm not going to rule it out. Of course, we're here to ask for their help. We have good relationships with these companies. I'm here to ask for their help. And I will use the law if I need to, but I'm asking for their help because, as the Commissioner said, it's the way they design things we need their help on.
So if it's so dire and you're saying it takes up so many resources, though, only one from a layman like me seems low. Why only one? Well,
in my case, nearly
how many?
Almost 100% of my priority counter-terrorism, counter-espionage cases, we can't bust through this encryption when we have the warrant. That's got to be a problem for all Australians, not just my people.
Katina Curtis, next question.
Katina Curtis from the West Australian. I was interested, Commissioner Kershaw, in the quite devastating numbers you had about the increase in reports of child exploitation. What do you think is behind that increase in reports? Is there actually more people doing this activity, or is it just that it's being reported more? And do you think that having age verification on social media or other tools, would that actually be useful, or would it give parents a false sense of security?
I think the internet and the dark web has brought more and more of the pedophiles together, and sadly we know through this crime type, and that's why I mentioned there's probably not enough study done in this crime type. There's not many worldwide reports that you can access to see if you're downloading that material, do you become a contact offender? My view is you do eventually, but there's arguments about that across the world. There's one report where they looked at a federal prison in the US, and for every contact offence they admitted to, you had to times it by 4. So there were 4 more victims that were not discovered. I think what we're seeing, sadly, is it's part of our community that some people have a persuasion for wanting to sexually assault children. It's a real concern, and the other piece of that is that you know, we're seeing they normally reoffend as well, so it doesn't ever change. It's a crime type that's quite unique in the sense that I believe you're hardwired that way and you can't change.
And age verification, would that be helpful or not really?
It may be, but you'd have to probably look at any unintended consequences, and those are sorts of the things that I would leave to government policymakers.
Do you have a view on age verification, Mike?
Sorry?
Age verification for social media, would that help your job?
Well, would it help my job? I think it would help with the problem, but obviously, again, as Reece says, there are other people more qualified to talk about that in government.
Next question from Andrew Brown.
Andrew Brown from AAP Newswire. Thank you both for your speeches. Mr Burgess, you've talked previously about the threats of ideological groups and mentioning incel groups as being a part of that. How much is that still under the radar of ASIO? And given the incident at Bondi Junction when women were actively targeted in the stabbing attack, at what point do attacks on women be considered as terrorism, given that many of the perpetrators in incel groups believe in dangerous ideology and could have been said to be radicalised by misogyny?
Sure. So the definition of terrorism is a specific definition under law, and from a security intelligence point of view and our heads of security, promotion of politically or communal violence, promotion of politically motivated violence. Incel is one ideology, and there are people with that ideology that think violence against women is the answer. So of course, if we saw that and indications of that, that could well be a terrorist incident. Of course, that's how it would be handled with the matter on foot. Incels do exist in this country, sadly. They're not dominant in the threat landscape that we look at, but they are there, and these sorts of attacks from a terrorism label perspective could come from a range of ideologies, including incel, but the bulk of them are neo-Nazis and Sunni violent extremists. So that's statistically where they'll come from. That's probably all I can say at this stage.
I'd also say just that it's got to also further a cause, so that's the difference.
Next question from Alan Ransley.
Thank you. Andrew actually just took my question, but I wanted to go back to something else you were talking about in terms of AI and the risk that it poses to young children. Are you also concerned by how AI could be used in instances of, say, revenge porn or other, instances like that concerning adults? How problematic do you think that is?
Unfortunately, I think it'll go back to the criminal mind of how innovative and ingenious they can be. So I have no doubt they will weaponise AI to their advantage. So we will see more victims, more than likely, and perhaps more silent victims which we won't know about. And that's why, really encouraging the community to contact police, whether it's the state police force or through the ACE or through whatever means or anywhere else to report it.
I know there's a little bit on in your day jobs. You happy for just 3 or 4 more minutes to get through the rest of the questions? Checked your watch. We're good, Mike? Okay. Jane Norman up next from the ABC.
Hello, sorry, late call up. Jane Norman from the ABC. Commissioner Kershaw, I've got a question about the Brittany Higgins case. Obviously, we've now had the defamation hearing closed, but the text messages that were involved in the criminal trials, they were subpoenaed, Brittany Higgins's text messages subpoenaed as part of the criminal trial, never actually presented in court, somehow landed in the hands of Channel 7 Spotlight program. I was wondering if you can confirm if this is under investigation by the AFP, and if so, when you might expect to have a conclusion on that case.
Yeah, I've seen reports of that. We are reviewing that material and that case as we speak.
So is it under investigation, or are you considering whether to investigate?
It's for us, it wouldn't, without me getting technical, it's not an investigation. It would be reviewing the material to see if there's a threshold for an investigation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Miriam Webber from Canberra Times.
Thank you both for your speeches. I'm Miriam Webber from the Canberra Times. Director General, you've spoken about AI fueling foreign interference and espionage. You were also referencing your threat assessment, talking about interference at scale online. Do you think federal public servants are prepared to deal with this threat? And does ASIO need to be more involved in getting them up to speed on dealing with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think federal public servants are probably better or more aware of the threats from espionage and foreign interference than everyday Australians, because they deal with government sensitive information and classified information, so they're probably in a better situation. But of course, we know in security it's got to be front of mind, and security is a shared responsibility. But as Australia's Security Service, we do a lot of outreach and education which helps people understand the threats in their hearts and their heads and know what to do with it, and we do that in partnerships with other people in government. So I think they're well placed. Do we need to do more? Absolutely, but everyone in Australia needs to do more because security is a shared responsibility.
Does that involve reviewing current advice and guidelines?
We're constantly reviewing advice and guidelines, and between ourselves, Attorney General's Department, Home Affairs and others, we're constantly making sure our security settings are right based on the threat that we see.
Julie Hare from the AFR.
Thank you so much for your speech. I'm just wondering, given the extreme tensions going on in the Middle East with Israel, Gaza and Iran, your assessment of increased possibility of any terrorist attack domestically in Australia?
Sure. So since 7th of October, we have seen both the events of Hamas and the horrific acts they did, and then the aftermath in terms of the war that's currently raging. That does resonate in our country. It resonated from day one. It's seen people who feel it because of family connections, religious connections, for a whole range of reasons. We've seen a number of protests expressing views. The majority of those protests have been peaceful, which is good, because post-protest being peaceful is the way it should be. From ASIO's perspective, though, the cohort that we look at, we've seen both sides of the equation celebrating aspects of this and talking about it, but that has not yet changed the threat environment. It did lead to, as we said early on, spontaneous violence around protests, but that's not terrorism. We keep an open mind to that, though, because as long as this continues, it resonates and may be going deeper, and as it changes the nature of it, it could be a problem, so we keep that an open mind, but it hasn't changed the threat level in this country.
Okay, thank you.
Melissa Code from the Mandarin.
Thank you both for your talk. In the week prior to the two violent incidents in Sydney, we had a lot of commentary and public discourse from Foreign Minister Penny Wong to the Prime Minister refer to social cohesion as a real critical area for Australia to focus on with respect to national security. I'd love to hear your comments on how social cohesion can be addressed either from an ASIO or law enforcement perspective, and also perhaps comments on how the whole of nation approach to national security is part of addressing that issue.
I could probably say this from a law enforcement point of view. You know, there's a couple of sayings. One is, you know, the police are the community and the community are the police, and it's an old saying, but it's so true for today. So we are actively working, all the police forces across this country, of building bridges constantly to the communities and different communities, given how diverse we are as a country, and also being more representative of the community we serve. And that's one of the things that we do have a challenge with, is getting some communities to trust the parents to trust their daughters and sons to come and join, for example, police forces, given some have come from countries where the police force haven't acted, you know, by rule of law. So we're constantly engaging, whether that's through our community teams or through other means and other forums. So for us, it's about building public confidence that the police are doing a good job, and we're sort of seeing some of the social media and disinformation and misinformation erode that public confidence. So we're trying to get out there as quickly as we can, share those stories and that information to prevent this from happening and keep confidence in police high.
Just briefly on that too, after that incident and others, there is misinformation. We might have no news on Facebook from July. Is that a concern that there's not even going to be any news articles at that point? It will just be misinformation flying everywhere?
It's something we'll have to watch, I think, because there is so much information out there, and how do you know what's true and not true, or AI generated, or you know, by other means? So it's something that I think we're going to have to constantly have that education piece and be smart about how you search and who you trust, where the information comes from. You know, you may have to ask, where does that source come from, and sort of investigate your way down, unfortunately.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, would you please thank Reece, Kershaw and Mike Burgess?